So I'm just going to quickly go through a couple of the forces that you can use to affect dynamic objects. So if I just recover my previous bullet session, which is Command-Shift-R, and then if I just run that simulation, you'll see that these objects just drop down to the ground. Okay, not very exciting. I'm actually going to turn gravity off just to show you these forces. So under the object menu, there's a new kind of effector, which is called a force. And you need to place that by hand. So I'm just going to zoom out of these objects slightly, and I'm just going to place it in the center of this field here. And I'm right, yes, and if you double click on the force, you can set what type of force it's going to be. So that's the force method here, and how much it will affect the objects. Those are effectively the two basic settings. So you can have a vector force, impulse, attractor, or dampening, and I'm going to show you vector first. So if you select vector and then you run your simulation, absolutely nothing will happen because you actually need to do two more things before the force will have any effect at all. The first of them, you may have already guessed, is to add it to the dynamic set, which will tell Bullet that you want it to be included in the simulation. And then the second one is you need to tell it to which objects you want it to apply to, which is apply to set. So we want it to apply to everything, so that'd be the dynamic objects. And then if we run the simulation again, the objects will start to be affected by this force. So what vector does is it effectively sends the objects along a vector with a certain amount of acceleration. You can choose the direction either x, y, z here. So if I put 100 in this field, they're going to go flying. This little red arrow here tells you which direction. Well, it doesn't tell you which direction. Well, it does tell you which direction. It also tells you how much acceleration the force has. Just a visual reference there. So if I simulate that, you'll see the objects go flying off. Now, what's really cool is you can actually rotate this object. So if I rotate it this way around and then run the simulation, the objects will go flying up there. So it's not just limited to straight X, Y, and Z. You can actually rotate it to any arbitrary vector you wish. So if I move this object, this vector down, in the X-Form tab, there is a drop-off option. And if you hit enable on this, it creates a bounding box for the force. So the force will only affect objects that go inside the drop-off zone, inside that bounding box. So if I make this much larger than it is, I make it huge, and I'm just going to reset its rotation. I'm just going to move it down slightly. Right, so if I zoom out of here and rotate around, I'm going to put gravity back on. So if I go 9.8, and then I run the simulation, you'll notice that the objects all drop down, and then once they get inside the field, they go flying off to one side. Okay, fair enough. So another way that you can, another neat feature that forces have is this noise tab. So over the noise tab here, you can add noise to any force. So I'm going to put a value of 100 in here again, and I'm just going to run the simulation. And you notice that, well, not much noticeable happens because the acceleration is so much for the vector that the objects fly off, and it kind of swallows any noise. So I'm actually going to turn acceleration off. Go back to the noise tab here. Let's have a look at this. So if I run the simulation again, you notice that you probably did notice some noise there, but again, gravity's on, and that's going to confuse things. So I'm just going to turn that off. Here you go. So you can see the objects just moving around in their space. You have a seed value and also scale here. That would be the frequency of the noise. So if I put this down to 0.1, the objects would kind of change direction more frequently, as it were. I'm going to turn the value up just so you can see this a bit more dramatically. There you go. And once the objects escape the box, they have the noise has no effect on them at all. So if I can add some gravity back on here, just going to turn that back on. I'm going to zoom out slightly, and then run the simulation again. So the objects are going to fall out the box, and then once they're out, there is no more noise on them. So that's one of the forces. The next force I'll show you is the attractor force. So I'm going to turn off drop off for now, and I'm going to turn off gravity as well. And then in the properties tab for this force, I'm going to change it from vector to attractor. Now I'm going to zoom in slightly. So you can see these objects are kind of spread out like this. And if I then just run the simulation, you'll notice that the objects have noise on them still, and they have no acceleration in the attractor. So ignore that for a second. I'm just going to turn the amount of noise off, and I'm going to turn the amount of acceleration on the attractor. This would be the magnitude of the force. So I'm just going to turn that up, and I'm going to press simulate again, and you can see the objects all kind of being drawn towards the effector there, the force, as it were. This spring factor here, if I just put that to 10, you'll notice the effect that has. Objects can kind of get lose their attraction and regain it. It's not particularly obvious with only one object. With all these objects colliding with each other. If I were to put some bounce on these objects, it's perhaps more obvious. And then if I turn the spring factor down, if I put the spring factor to 0, you see the objects are much more strictly attracted to the goal. They don't look too happy, do they? So I'm going to put this back up to 1, and I'm going to turn this bounce down to 0.3. Right click, set selected. I'll just run the simulation one last time for you. And there you go. And the last force I'm going to show you today is the dampening force. So if I change the force method here to dampening, and if I zoom out slightly, where is the force? Right, I'm just going to add the drop off to this object again, just so you can get an idea of what dampening actually does. So I'm just going to zoom out and come down slightly. Right, in the properties tab here, we have two damp factors here. It's the linear damp factor that we're going to be interested in. I'm just going to run the simulation just so you can see what the scene is like before I add dampening. So that's just the objects falling down. So I'm going to change the linear dampening here to 0.1, and we'll see what happens to the objects when they go inside the bounding box of the force. They slow down and accelerate. So they're slowing down when they reach around about the middle of the object, and then they just carry on dropping outside of it. So to get this fall off on this box to be much more closer to the edge, you can go back to the Xform tab and you can change this power option here. You can change that to 0, and then if we just run the simulation again, the objects will just get inside in the box, and then they'll instantly be damped, and then they'll carry on falling because of gravity. Or we can just set this option to 1, which will make the drop off far smoother from a gradiated. So, or you can just obviously you don't need a drop off. You don't need drop off turned on at all. But that's effectively what dampening does. It will just slow down objects. So that's all for the forces at the moment.